A little over 12,000 years ago, North America was home to more species of large predators at the same time than the modern African savanna. Not one or two famous animals, an entire cast of them. The largest bear that ever walked the earth lived here, a bear so large that when it stood upright, it towered over anything alive in North America today. A cat with saber teeth, nearly 8 inches long, hunted across open grasslands and river valleys. A pig like animal with a skull almost 3 feet long ate virtually anything it could overpower, scavenge, or crush. And long before any of them arrived, another predator had already turned the continent into a dangerous place. Paleontologists call it an entelodont. Most people know it by a different name, the hell pig. What makes this world so difficult to imagine is that none of these animals existed in isolation. They shared the same continent, the same prey, and in some cases the same landscapes, and then they disappeared. Within a remarkably short span of geological time, one of the most formidable predator communities the planet has ever produced was gone. Today, we're going back into that lost world. Before we do, if you enjoy content like this, hit the like button and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, is it late where you are right now, or are you starting your day with this? Now, let's step into a North America no human being will ever see again. Imagine a map that never stays still. Ice advances, retreats, and advances again. Forests spread across one region, while grasslands expand across another. Rivers shift course across broad interior plains. For more than 2 million years, the Pleistocene epoch unfolded through a repeating rhythm of colder intervals and warmer interludes, shaping a continent that changed its appearance many times without ever losing its extraordinary capacity for life. During the warmer phases, much of what is now the continental United States supported a landscape rich in food and movement. Open grasslands stretched across immense distances. Woodlands and forests occupied favorable ground. Water flowed through branching river systems that connected habitats across thousands of miles. Herds could travel, predators could follow, and populations could expand across environments that produced vegetation in abundance. This matters because the animals of prehistoric North America were not emerging from a harsh, frozen world. Many evolved within ecosystems capable of supporting tremendous biomass. Large herbivores flourished where food remained plentiful across broad territories, and wherever enormous prey animals gathered, opportunities appeared for equally formidable hunters. Geography contributed another layer to the story. Across the far north lay Beringia, a land bridge linking North America and Asia. At certain points, it covered an area comparable to modern Australia. It was less a narrow crossing than an entire ecological region, complete with its own plant communities and animal populations. Species moved across it for hundreds of thousands of years. Bears wandered east and west, lions crossed into new territory, horses expanded their range. Much later, humans would follow pathways already traveled by generations of animals. Far to the south, another transformation altered the continent. Around 3 million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama connected North America and South America, two landmasses that had spent millions of years developing separately, suddenly shared a route between them. The exchange that followed reshaped ecosystems on both continents. Animals from the north moved south, creatures from the south moved north. Distinct evolutionary histories met on common ground. Some newcomers succeeded immediately, others struggled. Many adapted, diversified, and became part of ecological communities unlike anything that had existed before. By the late Pleistocene, North America carried the legacy of these converging migrations. Native lineages remained, Arrivals from Asia had established themselves across immense territories. Species whose ancestors evolved in South America now occupied portions of the same continent. Their paths crossed in grasslands, forests, floodplains, and valleys shaped by cycles of climate and time. The remarkable concentration of predators that later inhabited this land begins to make sense when viewed through that lens. Their world represented the meeting place of multiple evolutionary stories, different hunting strategies, different body plans, and different ecological roles accumulated within the same broad stage. The continent became a gathering point where separate histories overlapped and persisted together. Against that backdrop, the creatures themselves emerge with greater clarity. Their size, diversity, and dominance were products of a land assembled from many sources, shaped across millions of years, and crowded with opportunity. A skull appears first in the fossil record, long before the rest of the animal comes into focus. Nearly 3 feet from end to end, it seems oversized even before its owner is reconstructed around it. Jawbones flare outward. Thick ridges and bony projections frame the face. Teeth crowd the mouth in an arrangement that feels assembled for many purposes at once. From those remains emerged one of the most formidable predators North America ever produced, an animal known as Daeodon shoshinensis. The popular nickname Hell Pig has endured for good reason. Daeodon belonged to a group called the Entelodonts, distant relatives of modern pigs, though the resemblance ends quickly. Standing close to 6 feet at the shoulder and weighing as much as 2,000 pounds, a large individual rivaled a bison in size. Its body combined height, mass, and mobility in proportions that seem unusual even among extinct mammals. Much of its reputation comes from the head. Paleontologists continue to debate the purpose of the prominent flanges and knobs along the skull and lower jaw. Some may have functioned as display structures visible to rivals. Others may have supported powerful muscles capable of generating tremendous bite force. Whatever their exact role, they contributed to a silhouette unlike any living animal. The teeth reveal an equally unusual story. Sharp canines could puncture flesh. Incisors were suited for tearing. Broad molars carried enough strength to crush bone. Many predators specialize. Daeodon appears to have preferred options. Its mouth functioned as a complete toolkit, allowing it to process food sources that would challenge more narrowly adapted carnivores. Fossil evidence suggests that flexibility shaped its success. Remains indicate feeding on horses, rhinoceroses, and camels, all residents of North America during the Oligocene and early Miocene. Some carcasses bear marks associated with active predation, others point toward scavenging. The distinction may not have mattered greatly to Daeodon. Any opportunity to obtain calories could become part of its diet. Life among entelodonts appears to have been harsh even within their own species. Several fossil skulls preserve healed bite wounds inflicted by other Daeodon. These injuries show that individuals often survived encounters severe enough to leave permanent marks in bone. Competition for territory, mates, or food likely produced frequent violent confrontations between animals already equipped with formidable jaws. Their bodies added another advantage. Long limbs relative to overall mass suggest greater speed than their bulk would imply. They were unlikely to sustain long pursuits across great distances, yet evidence points toward strong bursts of movement. A 2,000-pound animal capable of accelerating quickly would have commanded attention wherever it traveled. For millions of years, Daeodon occupied a position near the top of its ecological community. Size discouraged challengers. Aggression carried its own protective value. Dietary flexibility reduced dependence on any single food source. Healthy adults probably faced few serious threats from other predators sharing the landscape. Their reign stretched from roughly 29 million to 19 million years ago, far earlier than the famous Ice Age hunters that would later dominate the continent. By the time those future predators appeared, the entelodonts had already come and gone, leaving behind fossils that reveal North America had been producing apex carnivores for a very long time. Bones accumulated in asphalt for thousands of years, and among them, one predator appears again and again. Jawbones, teeth, limb fragments, skulls, entire individuals. Count after count leads back to the same animal. More than 4,000 dire wolves have been recovered from the deposits of La Brea, a number so large that it transforms the species from a familiar Ice Age icon into something much more substantial. This was not a rare hunter glimpsed at the edge of the ecosystem. It was one of the defining presences of Pleistocene North America. For generations, the dire wolf was imagined as a larger version of the gray wolf. The resemblance seemed obvious. Both possessed long legs, powerful jaws, and a body built for life among large prey. Then a study published in 2021 changed the picture. Researchers analyzed genetic material preserved within 5 dire wolf specimens and discovered that the similarity concealed a far deeper separation. Dire wolves belonged to their own lineage, one that diverged from the ancestors of gray wolves roughly 5.7 million years ago. That distance carried important consequences. Although dire wolves and gray wolves occupied overlapping regions for thousands of years, evidence suggests they remained genetically isolated. Their relationship was much more distant than their appearance implied. The familiar image of two closely related wolf species sharing the same landscape gave way to something stranger. Two separate evolutionary stories arriving at comparable forms through different paths. Physically, dire wolves carried more weight than their modern counterparts. An average individual weighed between 130 and 150 pounds, with large males reaching around 170 pounds. Their skulls were broader, their jaws more robust, and their teeth particularly well suited for handling dense material. Where many predators focus on flesh, dire wolves appear to have extracted value from nearly every part of a carcass. Evidence of that lifestyle survives in their teeth. Wear patterns indicate frequent contact with bone. Repeated grinding and cracking left marks consistent with animals that consumed far more than muscle tissue alone. Whether they obtained those resources through hunting, scavenging, or a combination of both, dire wolves were capable of processing food sources that many competitors would leave behind. Their range stretched across an extraordinary portion of the Western Hemisphere. Fossils have been found from California to Florida and into South America. Such distribution reflects ecological flexibility. Different climates, different prey communities, and different landscapes all supported populations of the same predator. The concentration of dire wolves at La Brea offers another clue to their behavior. Animals trapped in asphalt struggled for hours or days. Distress attracted scavengers and hunters. Dire wolves arrived in great numbers, drawn repeatedly toward opportunity. Many became trapped themselves. Layer after layer of preserved remains records a pattern of confidence and persistence that lasted for thousands of years. Near the end of the Pleistocene, they endured longer than many species around them. Dire wolves survived as prey populations declined and ecological networks began to fray. Their final disappearance came approximately 9,500 years ago, placing them among the last great predators of that fading world. Even now, their abundance remains one of the clearest signs of how densely populated North America's predator community once was. A footprint pressed into soft ground can suggest more than size. It can hint at posture, movement, and the shape of a life. In the case of Arctidus simus, The giant short faced bear. Nearly every clue points toward an animal that stretched the limits of what a bear could be. Seen from a distance, it may have resembled a familiar bear, enlarged to improbable proportions. Closer examination reveals something different. Adult males could stand 5 to 6 feet tall at the shoulder while moving on all fours. When rising upright, they reached heights exceeding 11 feet. Body mass estimates for the largest individuals range from roughly 1,500 to 2,500 pounds, placing them beyond any bear species alive today. Its name comes from the structure of its face. Compared with modern bears, the snout was compressed, bringing the front of the jaws closer to the muscles that powered them. This arrangement likely increased bite force near the front of the mouth. The skull itself was deep and broad, built to withstand considerable stress. Even among large carnivorous mammals, the head of Arctidus possessed an imposing architecture. Yet the skull is only part of the story. The proportions of the limbs have attracted equal attention from researchers. Modern bears often carry much of their mass on relatively compact legs, giving them a heavy, rolling gait. Arctidus followed a different design. Its limbs were noticeably longer relative to body size, creating a silhouette that appears almost unfamiliar when compared with living relatives. Those elongated legs have inspired decades of discussion. Some studies suggest they allowed efficient travel across long distances, conserving energy while moving through expansive territories. Others propose that the bear was capable of bursts of speed approaching 40 miles per hour. Whether the highest estimates prove accurate or not, the underlying pattern remains consistent. This was an animal adapted for covering ground with unusual efficiency. Its place within the ecosystem remains a topic of active investigation. One influential interpretation presents Arctidus as a kleptoparasite, a species that frequently acquired food by taking it from other predators. Such a strategy becomes plausible when size, strength, and mobility are considered together. A bear towering above competitors and arriving swiftly at the scene of a fresh kill would possess considerable leverage. Picture a carcass already surrounded by carnivores. Teeth have opened the hide. Feeding has begun. Then a giant short faced bear approaches. In many circumstances, direct confrontation would offer little reward for the animals already present. Yielding the meal may have been the safer decision. Chemical evidence preserved within fossil bone collagen adds further complexity. Some individuals display signatures associated with heavily meat based diets. Others show patterns consistent with broader feeding habits. Regional differences, seasonal changes, and individual behavior may all have contributed. Arctidus appears to have been adaptable, capable of shifting strategies when conditions demanded it. Across much of North America, its range overlapped with nearly every major predator of the late Pleistocene. Wolves, large cats, and other carnivores occupied the same landscapes. Few animals, however, matched the combination of height, mass, and reach embodied by this bear. It occupied a position unlike any living species. Around 11,600 years ago, Arctidus disappeared. The bones remain, scattered across the continent, preserving the outline of a predator whose presence reshaped every gathering around a carcass and every hierarchy within the communities it shared. Among the countless skulls recovered from the earth, few are recognizable from a silhouette alone. Two curved canine teeth extending far below the lower jaw are enough. Even before the body is reconstructed, the identity is clear. Smilodon remains one of the most distinctive predators ever produced by mammalian evolution. The genus contained three known species. Smilodon gracilis appeared first and was the smallest. Smilodon populator later became the giant of South America, with some individuals approaching 880 pounds. Between them stood Smilodon fatalis, the dominant North American species, and the form most often associated with the continent's late Pleistocene ecosystems. At first glance, comparisons with modern lions seem natural. In terms of weight, many individuals occupied a similar range, roughly 350 to 600 pounds. The resemblance fades when the skeleton is examined. Smilodon carried shorter legs, a deeper chest, and a heavier torso. Every proportion points toward strength concentrated at close range. Distance running played little role in its hunting strategy. The famous saber teeth were both impressive and surprisingly specialized. Reaching lengths of 7 to 8 inches, they resembled curved blades more than conventional feline canines. Their edges carried fine serrations, enhancing their effectiveness as cutting instruments. Yet those teeth were not built to withstand the forces involved in crushing bone. They required precision. A misplaced strike risked damaging the very tools that made the animal successful. That specialization shaped the anatomy of the entire skull. Biomechanical studies published in 2022 and 2023 indicate that Smilodon could open its jaws to approximately 120 degrees. Such a gape far exceeded that of living big cats. The arrangement allowed the saber teeth to clear the body of large prey and reach vulnerable tissues from angles unavailable to modern predators. Its method of killing appears equally distinctive. Instead of relying on a suffocating throat bite or a crushing attack directed at the skull, Smilodon likely targeted soft tissue. A carefully delivered strike to the throat or abdomen could sever major blood vessels and cause rapid blood loss. Success depended on control, accuracy, and timing. Powerful forelimbs provided that control. The front legs were exceptionally robust, more heavily built than those of any living cat, muscles anchored to broad bones capable of absorbing immense stress. These limbs functioned as grappling tools, pinning struggling prey and positioning it for the decisive strike. The animal's center of gravity, body proportions, and limb structure all supported the same approach. Evidence from La Brea offers insight into another aspect of its life. Several specimens display severe injuries that healed during the animal's lifetime. Broken bones, damaged joints, and other debilitating conditions would have prevented effective hunting for extended periods. Survival, through recovery, suggests access to food despite physical incapacity. Many researchers interpret this as evidence of social behavior, with injured individuals receiving support from companions. More than 2,000 Smilodon specimens have been recovered from La Brea alone, making it one of the best represented extinct carnivores in the fossil record. Those remains reveal a predator capable of tackling horses, bison, camels, tapirs, and even young mammoths or mastodons. Every feature of its body points toward a hunter refined for one purpose: bringing down prey that few other cats could challenge successfully. Across a stretch of open ground, there was once a cat larger than any lion alive today. Its tracks crossed grasslands, woodland edges, and broad valleys where herds moved seasonally across the continent. Although no living person has ever seen one, enough bones remain to reveal the outline of an animal that ranked among the greatest feline predators North America ever produced. Its scientific name is Panthera leo atrox, commonly known as the American lion. Males likely weighed between 500 and 800 pounds and could reach body lengths approaching 8 feet. Those dimensions place them roughly 1/4 larger than modern African lions. Size alone, however, does not explain their success. The structure of the body reveals a predator shaped for a different style of hunting. The American lion arrived from Asia, approximately 340,000 years ago. Its ancestors crossed Beringia during one of the many periods when that northern connection linked continents. By the time it established itself across North America, another famous cat already occupied portions of the landscape. Smilodon had reached the continent through a separate evolutionary pathway and carried an entirely different set of tools. The contrast between the two cats appears immediately in the skull. Smilodon relied on elongated saber teeth and a highly specialized killing technique. The American lion possessed comparatively modest canines. Its jaws were designed for conventional feline bites, delivering force through a more familiar arrangement of teeth and muscles. Where one predator depended upon precision strikes delivered at close quarters, the other appears to have favored pursuit and control. Its limbs support that interpretation. Proportions within the skeleton indicate a more cursorial lifestyle than that of modern lions. Long legs and a body built for sustained movement suggest an animal capable of covering considerable distances while following prey. Open habitats would have favored such a hunter. Rather than overpowering prey through ambush alone, it may often have relied on endurance, speed, and coordinated positioning. The fossil record offers another intriguing detail. Compared with dire wolves and Smilodon, relatively few American lion remains have been recovered from La Brea. Several explanations have been proposed. Greater caution around trapped animals may have reduced the likelihood of becoming ensnared. Hunting habits could also have kept these cats away from situations that repeatedly attracted other carnivores into danger. Whatever the cause, their relative scarcity hints at behavioral differences invisible in bones alone. Evidence from Europe provides an additional glimpse into the broader lion lineage. Cave paintings in southern France depict closely related cave lions in scenes that appear to show group activity. Although these images do not portray American lions directly, they offer the only visual record associated with extinct lions. Some researchers view them as tentative support for social behavior among related populations. Competition almost certainly shaped daily life. American lions and Smilodon shared portions of the same continent and pursued many of the same prey animals. Yet isotope studies suggest the overlap was not complete. Subtle differences in habitat preference, prey selection, and feeding behavior may have reduced direct conflict. Ecological separation at a fine scale allowed multiple apex predators to exist within the same broader system. Around 11,000 years ago, the American lion disappeared. Its bones remain scattered across North America, preserving the record of a hunter built for movement, endurance, and a style of predation distinct from every great cat that shared its world. Feathers rarely enter discussions of apex predators. The image most people imagine involves claws, fangs, or heavy jaws attached to a mammal. South America followed a different path. For millions of years, isolation allowed an extraordinary group of carnivorous birds to evolve without comparison anywhere else on Earth. They became known as the forest racids, though history remembers them more vividly by another name, terror birds. Their story began during roughly 30 million years of separation from the northern continents. While mammals diversified elsewhere, these birds expanded into predatory roles across South America. Generation after generation refined a body plan unlike that of any cat, wolf, or bear. When the Isthmus of Panama eventually connected the continents around 3 million years ago, some of those lineages gained access to entirely new territory. Among them was Titanus walleri, the only terror bird known from North America. Fossils recovered in Texas and Florida place it between approximately 5 million and 1.8 million years ago. By that time, the continent already hosted a growing collection of predators. Titanus entered that world carrying an evolutionary toolkit forged elsewhere. Its dimensions alone were striking. Standing 7 to 8 feet tall and weighing as much as 300 pounds, Titanus towered above most animals it encountered. Height gave it a commanding view across open terrain. Long legs elevated the body well above surrounding vegetation, allowing it to detect movement at considerable distance. The head formed the centerpiece of the design. At the end of a powerful neck sat a massive hooked beak shaped less like that of a scavenging bird and more like a specialized impact tool. The structure was deep, reinforced, and capable of concentrating force into a narrow point. Every feature suggests an instrument built to strike repeatedly. Studies of the skull provide clues about how those strikes may have been delivered. Computer models indicate the bones were particularly well adapted to withstand vertical impacts. Sideways forces appear to have been less favorable. From this evidence, researchers have proposed a hunting technique involving repeated downward blows. Smaller prey could have been seized and slammed against the ground. Larger animals may have been weakened through successive attacks directed at vulnerable regions of the body. Movement played an equally important role. Leg proportions suggest impressive running ability, with estimates ranging from 30 to 45 miles per hour. Such speed would have allowed Titanus to close distance rapidly across open habitats. Few prey animals could rely solely on escape once detected. Its wings had become too small for flight, yet they were not entirely useless. Evidence suggests they may have contributed to balance during abrupt turns or provided stability while delivering forceful strikes. Even reduced structures could remain valuable when integrated into the mechanics of hunting. North America eventually changed around these birds. New predators arrived. Ecological relationships grew increasingly complex. Competition intensified as additional carnivorous mammals expanded across the continent. Around 1.8 million years ago, Titanus disappeared from the fossil record. Its extinction occurred long before the famous end of the Pleistocene, marking the close of an earlier chapter. The terror birds remain a reminder that predator evolution does not follow a single template. At one point in North American history, a towering flightless bird stood among the continent's hunters, pursuing prey on running legs and wielding a beak shaped by millions of years of experimentation. A pair of tracks crossing open ground can tell a story long after the animal that made them has vanished. In North America, one such story survives inside the body of a living creature. The runner remains. The hunter does not. Miracinonyx trumani, often called the American cheetah, lived from approximately 2.6 million years ago until around 11,000 years ago. Despite the familiar nickname, it was not the ancestor of the modern African cheetah. The resemblance emerged through convergent evolution, a process in which unrelated species arrive at strikingly similar solutions to the same ecological challenge. Across separate continents and different evolutionary histories, both animals were shaped by the demands of extreme speed. The skeleton of Miracinonyx reveals that pattern with remarkable clarity. Long, slender limbs stretched beneath a lightweight frame. A deep chest provided room for enlarged lungs and a powerful heart. Its spine possessed the flexibility needed to lengthen stride during a sprint. Each feature followed the same engineering logic seen in the African cheetah. Nature had arrived at nearly the same design twice. Speed estimates suggest top velocities between 60 and 70 miles per hour. Such performance placed Miracinonyx among the fastest land predators ever known. Across grasslands and open country, acceleration and endurance combined into a hunting strategy based on pursuit. Distance became a weapon. Escape depended on matching a predator built specifically to erase it. Yet Miracinonyx was not merely a duplicate of the African form. Fossil evidence indicates more fully retractable claws than those of modern cheetahs. That detail hints at a different lifestyle, perhaps involving climbing abilities absent from its modern counterpart. The result was a predator that blended traits associated with several living cats while remaining unlike any of them. No modern species provides a perfect comparison. Its most important relationship may have been with a prey animal still living today. The pronghorn antelope possesses one of the most impressive cardiovascular systems among land mammals. Its lungs process enormous volumes of air. Its windpipe is unusually large. Its muscles and tendons support prolonged high-speed travel across great distances. Few animals can maintain such pace. For many years, that level of performance appeared puzzling. No living predator in North America can consistently challenge a healthy adult pronghorn in a sustained chase. Wolves tire, mountain lions rely on ambush, coyotes fall behind. The explanation emerged from the fossil record. The pronghorn's speed was forged in a world where Miracinonyx existed. Evolution leaves marks that can persist long after the original pressure disappears. Biologists call such patterns evolutionary anachronisms. A trait remains because it once solved a problem, even when the problem itself has vanished. The pronghorn carries one of the clearest examples. Every rapid stride echoes an ecological relationship that ended thousands of years ago. Across modern grasslands, pronghorns still accelerate with extraordinary efficiency. Their bodies continue performing exactly as natural selection shaped them to perform. The predator that helped create those adaptations disappeared near the end of the Pleistocene, yet the response endures. A chase continues with only one participant remaining. In that sense, the American cheetah never fully left. Part of it survives in the motion of another species, written into muscle, bone, and breath, preserved not in stone, but in speed itself. Protection can shape an animal as profoundly as speed or strength. Across the landscapes of the late Pleistocene, some creatures survived not by outrunning danger or overpowering it, but by becoming so difficult to kill that even the continent's greatest predators faced an unpleasant calculation before attacking. Among the most striking arrivals from South America was Glyptodon, a distant relative of modern armadillos. After the formation of the Isthmus of Panama connected the continents, this heavily armored traveler expanded northward into environments already crowded with formidable hunters. At first glance, its outline resembled a moving boulder. Reaching roughly 11 feet in length and weighing as much as 2 tons, it occupied a space closer to a small automobile than any living armadillo. Its defining feature was the shell. Unlike the flexible bands covering modern armadillos, Glyptodon carried a fused dome constructed from thousands of interlocking osteoderms. This protective covering formed a single, rigid structure, in some places approaching 2.4 inches in thickness. Teeth designed for slicing flesh met a barrier of bone. Predators could surround it, harass it, or wait for weakness. Yet no known carnivore from Pleistocene North America possessed the equipment required to bite directly through that shield. Defense did not end there. In a related genus called Dodecurus, the tail terminated in a heavy club armed with spikes or enlarged knobs of bone. Biomechanical analyses suggest a full-force swing could generate tremendous impact energy. Fossilized shells preserve evidence of exactly such encounters, displaying fractures consistent with powerful tail strikes. These animals were not merely protected from attack, they carried weapons capable of damaging one another during territorial disputes or competition for mates. Another immigrant lineage crossed the same land connection while following an entirely different evolutionary path. The giant ground sloths appeared unlike any mammal living today. Megatherium americanum ranked among the largest. Adults could reach around 20 feet in length and weigh between 6 and 8 tons. Their bulk approached that of a modern elephant, though their ancestry traced back to tree-dwelling sloths no larger than household pets. Massive forelimbs supported claws that could exceed 12 inches in length. Those claws helped pull down branches and expose roots, allowing access to enormous quantities of vegetation. They also transformed the animal into a difficult target. A predator approaching from the wrong angle risked encountering a sweeping arc of bone and muscle capable of inflicting catastrophic wounds. Further protection may have been concealed within the skin itself. Fossil evidence from South American specimens indicates the presence of embedded osteoderms scattered through the hide. These small, bony structures formed an additional defensive layer beneath the fur, adding resilience against bites and claws. Combined with tremendous body size, they created an herbivore that demanded caution from even the most accomplished hunters. Their unusual posture reflected the challenge of carrying such claws. Instead of placing the entire foot flat against the ground, giant ground sloths often walked along the outer edges of their feet. The inward curving claws remained elevated, preserving their effectiveness while producing a steady, deliberate stride. Centuries after their disappearance, these animals continued to capture human imagination. Thomas Jefferson examined early North American ground sloth fossils and entertained the possibility that such creatures might still inhabit unexplored regions of the continent. He even encouraged the Corps of Discovery expedition to watch for evidence of them. The search occurred roughly 10,000 years too late. By then, the armored giants had already joined the vanished world from which their bones emerged. A footprint can outlast the animal that made it. In the Pleistocene landscapes of North America, some footprints measured nearly 2 feet across and appeared in long, winding trails that stretched toward rivers, grasslands, and distant woodlands. Those tracks belonged to Columbian mammoths, creatures whose influence reached far beyond their immense size. Mammothus columbi was the dominant megaherbivore across much of North America during the Pleistocene, standing as much as 13 to 14 feet at the shoulder and weighing up to 10 tons. It exceeded the size of any elephant living today. These animals occupied temperate and subtropical regions, extending across much of what is now the continental United States and Mexico. Unlike their woolly relatives farther north, Columbian mammoths thrived in open grasslands, savannas, and scattered woodland habitats where food remained abundant through much of the year. Their tusks ranked among the most extraordinary structures produced by any land mammal. Growing up to 16 feet in length, they curved outward and upward in sweeping spirals. Those tusks served many purposes. They scraped away snow and ice to expose winter vegetation. They stripped bark from trees and excavated soil in search of water during dry periods. Mature males also carried the marks of combat, evidence that tusks became powerful tools during contests for status and breeding opportunities. The teeth behind those tusks reveal another story. Columbian mammoths fed heavily on grasses containing abrasive silica particles. To withstand such wear, each tooth consisted of tightly packed enamel ridges arranged into grinding surfaces of remarkable durability. Individual teeth could reach the size of a human forearm. Throughout life, worn teeth were gradually replaced by new ones moving forward through the jaw, a system perfectly suited to processing enormous quantities of vegetation. Yet their true importance cannot be measured in feet, tons, or tusk length. Columbian mammoths shaped the environments around them. Every herd altered the land through movement, feeding, and excavation. Trees were pushed over or damaged, while animals searched for bark and foliage. Areas of dense growth opened into patches of grassland. Trails formed between feeding grounds and water sources, creating pathways used by many other species. Where mammoths dug into the earth, depressions collected water after rainfall. These wallows became gathering places for birds, smaller mammals, and countless organisms linked to those temporary habitats. Their dung returned nutrients to the soil and encouraged plant growth across broad areas. Repeated movement compacted some surfaces while exposing others. A passing herd functioned as an ecological force capable of reshaping habitat on a scale few animals could match. Many species benefited from the conditions mammoths maintained. Open landscapes supported grazing animals, which in turn supported large predators. The structure of entire communities became tied to the continued presence of these giant herbivores. Remove them, and the balance begins to shift. Shrubs and trees expand into former grasslands. Water sources change. Plant communities reorganize. Their adaptability appears clearly on the Channel Islands off the coast of California. Columbian mammoths reached these islands by swimming across channels from the mainland. Isolated from their larger population, they gradually underwent island dwarfism. Over many generations, descendants that once belonged to 10-ton giants shrank until some stood only about 6 feet at the shoulder. The Columbian mammoth was more than a resident of the Pleistocene world. It helped construct that world, shaping the stage upon which countless other species lived their lives. At the edge of a wet woodland, where spruce branches stretched over dark water and fallen leaves gathered along the banks of winding channels, another giant moved through North America. Its silhouette could resemble a mammoth from a distance, yet the resemblance concealed a far deeper story. The American mastodon belonged to a lineage that had already been traveling its own evolutionary path for roughly 27 million years before the final chapters of the Ice Age unfolded. Mammoth americanum is frequently grouped together with mammoths in popular imagination, though the two animals were separated by a substantial evolutionary divide. Their shared ancestry reached far back into the elephant family tree, after which each lineage developed its own anatomy, diet, and ecological role. The clearest distinction appears in their teeth. Mammoths carried broad grinding surfaces formed from ridged enamel plates, perfectly suited for processing tough grasses across open landscapes. Mastodons possessed rounded, cone-shaped cusps that worked more like crushing pegs, adapted for leaves, twigs, bark, and woody vegetation gathered from forests and wetland margins. Those teeth reveal an entire way of life. Columbian mammoths spent much of their existence in grasslands, savannas, and open habitats. Mastodons favored wooded environments where dense vegetation offered a different menu altogether. River valleys, marshy lowlands, conifer forests, and the edges of lakes became their domain. Through this division of habitat, two enormous proboscideans shared the same continent for millions of years while rarely competing directly for food. In stature, mastodons generally stood between 7 and 10 feet at the shoulder and weighed between 6 and 8 tons. They were somewhat smaller than the largest Columbian mammoths, yet their bodies often appeared more compact and heavily built. The lower profile helped them navigate tangled vegetation where visibility was limited and maneuverability mattered as much as size. Tusks curved forward from broad heads carried close to the body, creating an animal whose proportions suited life among trees instead of sweeping grasslands. Scientific discoveries have brought unusual detail to their daily lives. Fossilized dung and mineralized dental deposits recovered from specimens in the Great Lakes region preserved microscopic fragments of plants consumed thousands of years ago. Researchers examining these remains identified specific species of spruce and other vegetation eaten during particular seasons. Such evidence allows a glimpse into individual meals, transforming the mastodon from a distant fossil into a browsing animal moving through winter forests, one mouthful at a time. Patterns of tusk wear, age distribution, and skeletal development suggest social structures comparable in some respects to those of living elephants. Family groups likely centered around experienced adults whose knowledge of feeding grounds and seasonal movements benefited younger members. Across countless generations, these groups traveled through habitats that provided enough resources to sustain populations of remarkable size. For a very long span of time, mastodons and mammoths occupied neighboring worlds within the same continent. One shaped open country, the other threaded through forests. Their coexistence reflected the richness of a landscape capable of supporting multiple giants at once. Some of the youngest mastodon remains, discovered around the Great Lakes, date to roughly 10,000 to 11,000 years ago, marking the closing moments of a lineage that had endured for millions of years before finally fading from the North American scene. Imagine a landscape where danger did not belong to a single animal. It belonged to the arrangement itself. Across North America during the late Pleistocene, survival unfolded within a network of predators so crowded and so finely balanced that no modern ecosystem offers a true comparison. The closest examples found today still fall short of the complexity that once existed across these grasslands, woodlands, river corridors, and open plains. Modern Africa supports an impressive collection of large hunters. Lions, leopards, cheetahs, spotted hyenas, and African wild dogs all compete for overlapping prey. Their interactions shape one of the most studied predator communities on Earth. Yet the Pleistocene equivalent in North America contained an even denser concentration of formidable carnivores. Smilodon fatalis stalked large prey with specialized killing techniques. American lions ranged across open country. Dire wolves traveled in coordinated packs. The giant short-faced bear moved through the landscape with unmatched physical authority. The American cheetah pursued speed specialists across broad terrain. Large jaguars occupied their own hunting role, while black bears and giant eagles added further layers to an already crowded system. Such a concentration of predators could exist only because an extraordinary foundation supported it. Columbian mammoths crossed great distances in herds. Mastodons browsed through forests and wetland edges. Horses, camels, tapirs, bison, giant ground sloths, and glyptodons filled different ecological roles while converting plant life into living biomass. Every predator depended, directly or indirectly, on this abundance. Remove the prey, and the structure above it would have no support. As long as the prey remained diverse and widespread, the hunters could persist alongside one another. Competition certainly existed, yet constant conflict would have destabilized the entire arrangement. Nature solved this problem through specialization. Smilodon favored large animals that could be overpowered with strength and precision. American cheetahs focused on swift prey in open habitats. Dire wolves used cooperation to pursue medium-sized animals across long distances. American lions appear to have relied on pursuit and ambush strategies distinct from those of saber-toothed cats. The giant short-faced bear often gained advantage through size, arriving at carcasses and displacing other carnivores. Each predator occupied its own position within the broader framework. Evidence for this separation comes from more than anatomy. Fossil bones recovered from sites such as the La Brea tar pits preserve chemical signatures within bone collagen. Scientists measure carbon and nitrogen isotopes retained within those tissues and compare the results across species. These measurements provide detailed clues about diet, habitat use, and prey selection. The patterns consistently indicate that predators sharing the same region often focused on different food sources. Their lives overlapped, yet their ecological roles remained distinct enough to reduce direct competition. For hundreds of thousands of years, the arrangement endured. Predator populations rose and fell, climates shifted, and migrations altered local communities, yet the overall system remained intact. Stability emerged from countless relationships operating simultaneously, each linked to another through food, movement, and habitat. That endurance carried a hidden vulnerability. The same connections that allowed the ecosystem to function also tied its components together. A structure built from many interlocking parts can remain stable for immense spans of time. It can also become sensitive when enough pieces begin to disappear at once. The record of that world survives in remarkable detail, preserved through bones, teeth, tracks, and the traces of lives that once shared the same continent. A person can stand in the middle of modern Los Angeles, surrounded by traffic, museums, apartment buildings, and storefronts, and be only a few steps away from one of the richest windows into the Ice Age world. The La Brea tar pits occupy a small area within the Miracle Mile district, yet the ground beneath that neighborhood preserves an archive of vanished lives on a scale found almost nowhere else on Earth. The name itself creates a misleading image. The pits are not filled with tar. Deep underground petroleum deposits release crude oil toward the surface through natural faults and fractures. As lighter compounds evaporate, thick asphalt remains behind. Across thousands of years, these sticky deposits formed dark pools and patches scattered through the landscape. Some were visible, others disappeared beneath shallow water, leaves, dust, or vegetation. To an approaching animal, the surface could appear solid enough to cross. The danger emerged gradually. A hoof, paw, or foot would press into the asphalt and become trapped. Struggling only worsened the situation. The victim remained alive, often for extended periods, calling attention to itself through movement and distress. Such opportunities attracted scavengers and predators from the surrounding environment. They approached an animal that seemed vulnerable and easy to claim. Many discovered the trap only after stepping into it themselves. This process produced one of the most unusual fossil assemblages ever documented. In a typical ecosystem, herbivores greatly outnumber large carnivores. Death records usually reflect that balance. La Brea displays the opposite pattern. Roughly 90% of the large mammal remains belong to predators and scavengers, while only about 10% belong to herbivores. The trap effectively concentrated carnivores by turning every trapped prey animal into a powerful lure. The scale of preservation is difficult to grasp. More than 3.5 million specimens have been recovered from the site, including well over 1 million bones, representing more than 650 species. Plants, insects, birds, mammals, and countless smaller organisms appear together within the same record. Instead of preserving isolated animals, La Brea captures an entire ecological community. Each excavation layer offers another glimpse into how species interacted across a functioning landscape. The predator numbers alone are astonishing. More than 2,000 individual Smilodon specimens have been identified. Dire wolves are represented by over 4,000 individuals. These totals do not merely indicate that such animals existed, they reveal populations dense enough to sustain repeated encounters with the same natural trap across many generations. Among the discoveries is a Colombian mammoth known as Zed, uncovered during construction work in 2006. His skeleton preserved evidence of arthritis, a healed rib fracture, and damage along the spine. Bone recorded injuries, recovery, age, and survival. What remains is more than a fossil. It is the partial biography of a single animal that once moved through the broader community now preserved around him. Research continues today. New deposits still appear during construction projects, and scientists at the Page Museum continue extracting information from old and newly recovered material. La Brea reveals more than a list of species. It preserves relationships, population density, behavior, injury, survival, and death. Few places on Earth document an ecosystem with such extraordinary detail, capturing the closing chapters of a world that remained fully alive until the very end. Some stories circle back to where they began. Across the long history of North America, few examples are stranger than the histories of horses and camels, two animals often imagined as arrivals from distant lands. Their deeper story runs in the opposite direction. They originated here, evolved here, and spent millions of years shaping the continent before their descendants spread outward into the rest of the world. The horse lineage reaches back more than 55 million years. Early ancestors bore little resemblance to the animals familiar today. They were small creatures moving through woodland habitats on multiple toes, feeding among vegetation that covered a warmer world. Generation after generation, shifting climates and changing landscapes altered the selective pressures acting upon them. Limbs lengthened, bodies grew larger, side toes diminished. Eventually, a single dominant hoof emerged, well suited for efficient movement across expanding grasslands. By the time the Pleistocene arrived, members of the genus Equus occupied large portions of the continent. Multiple horse species shared North America, each adapted to slightly different environments. Some favored open plains, others occupied more varied habitats. Together they formed immense herds that traveled across landscapes stretching far beyond the horizon. Their movement influenced vegetation patterns, nutrient distribution, and the behavior of predators that depended upon them. At various points during the Ice Age, land connected North America and Asia through Beringia. Horses crossed that route and expanded into Eurasia. From those populations emerged the lineage that eventually gave rise to Equus ferus, the species ancestral to domestic horses. Thousands of years later, when European settlers transported horses across the Atlantic Ocean during the 16th century, they were unknowingly returning descendants of North American emigrants to the continent where their family history began. Camels followed a surprisingly similar path. Their story also began in North America, where early camel relatives evolved and diversified over millions of years. One of the largest later forms was Camelops hesternus, a long-legged species that exceeded the size of most living camels. It moved through western ecosystems that supported a remarkable variety of large mammals. Fossils indicate an animal built for covering considerable distances across open terrain while browsing a range of available vegetation. Branches of the camel family eventually dispersed beyond the continent. Some entered Asia and later Africa, giving rise to the camels known today. Others traveled southward and became the ancestors of llamas, alpacas, vicuñas, and guanacos. The familiar camel silhouette, often associated with distant deserts, traces part of its ancestry back to North American ground. Then, within the span that witnessed the broader megafaunal collapse, both horses and camels disappeared from their homeland. Roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, lineages that had participated in the continent's ecology for tens of millions of years vanished. Their absence altered grazing pressure across many environments. Plant communities continued adapting, now shaped by a different balance of herbivores and vegetation. Ecologists studying modern landscapes have found evidence that horse reintroduction changed grassland dynamics in ways still being examined today. Such findings hint at the depth of those older relationships. Horses and camels were woven into North America long before recorded history, long before cities, long before memory. Their extinction was not the removal of newcomers. It was the disappearance of original inhabitants whose roots reached into some of the deepest chapters of the continent's past. A stone point resting in the soil can carry an entire migration within its shape. Its edges preserve choices made by skilled hands, and those choices preserve knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Across North America, scattered discoveries of carefully crafted spear points mark the appearance of a newcomer, unlike any predator the continent had known before. The people associated with the Clovis culture left behind some of the most recognizable artifacts in North American archaeology. Named after discoveries near Clovis, New Mexico, these tools first drew scientific attention during the early 20th century. Their distinctive projectile points display a level of craftsmanship that reflects long traditions of learning. Each point was shaped from both sides and finished with a characteristic channel known as a flute extending from the base. That feature allowed the stone to be attached securely to a spear shaft, producing a weapon that combined durability, precision, and reach. Archaeological sites containing Clovis artifacts cluster within a surprisingly narrow span of time, between roughly 13,050 years ago and 12,750 years ago. Such a brief window, measured across a continent, suggests movement on a remarkable scale. Communities carrying the same technological tradition appeared across enormous distances in what seems to have been only a few centuries. Rivers, grasslands, foothills, and open plains became connected through networks of travel and knowledge that spread with extraordinary speed. The story grows more complex when older evidence enters the picture. At Monteverde, in Chile, traces of human activity date to approximately 14,500 years ago. The Gault site in Texas may preserve evidence older than 16,000 years. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania has produced dates that could reach 19,000 years into the past. These discoveries suggest that Clovis people were not necessarily the first inhabitants, only the earliest population documented clearly across such a broad geographic range. Debate continues regarding when humans arrived and how many migrations may have occurred. Possible routes into the continent reflect the changing geography of the Ice Age. One proposal follows an ice-free corridor that opened between enormous continental ice sheets. Another traces movement along the Pacific coast, where productive marine ecosystems could have supported travelers journeying by boat and shoreline camps. Evidence exists for both possibilities, and the full picture may include multiple pathways used at different times. Amid these discussions, one ecological detail remains especially important. For millions of years, North American animals evolved alongside formidable predators. They encountered saber-toothed cats, enormous bears, pursuit hunters, scavengers, and birds capable of delivering lethal strikes. None of those predators carried sharpened stone points attached to spears. None transported fire from place to place. None coordinated through language and culture in the manner of human communities. Examples from islands around the world offer a glimpse of what can happen when animals meet a completely unfamiliar kind of hunter. The dodo of Mauritius showed little fear toward people. The moa of New Zealand evolved without preparing for human pursuit. Madagascar's elephant birds never experienced a predator equipped with projectile weapons. Such encounters unfolded with startling speed. The megafauna of North America entered this meeting, shaped by every challenge their world had previously presented. Human beings represented something entirely new, a presence unlike any force that had participated in their evolutionary history. Within the span of a few centuries, the relationship between people and the continent's great animals became woven into one of the most intensely debated chapters in paleontology. Ideas sometimes reshape an entire field with a single proposal. In 1966, paleoecologist Paul Martin of the University of Arizona introduced one of the most influential and disputed explanations ever offered for the disappearance of North America's Ice Age giants. Known as the overkill hypothesis, it suggested that human beings, newly arrived on the continent, played the central role in an extinction event that removed dozens of large animal species within a surprisingly brief span of time. The argument begins with a striking observation. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, horses, camels, and many other large animals had endured repeated climatic swings across hundreds of thousands of years. Ice sheets advanced and retreated. Grasslands expanded and contracted. Forests shifted across the map. Through all of these transformations, the megafauna persisted. Then, within a relatively short interval following the appearance of humans, much of that community vanished. Martin proposed that hunting alone could explain the pattern. The idea did not require enormous human populations. Mathematical models, developed by Martin and refined by later researchers, explored how a small founding population might grow over generations while placing steady pressure on animal populations. Under certain conditions, even modest harvest rates could produce dramatic consequences. A community taking only a few large animals each week, while gradually expanding across the continent, could reduce slow reproducing mammoth populations faster than those populations could recover. Part of the argument rests on the biology of the prey themselves. Mammoths, mastodons, and other large herbivores produced relatively few offspring. Population growth occurred gradually. Losses that might appear minor on a yearly basis could accumulate across centuries. Human hunters possessed tools, planning, cooperation, and mobility unlike anything those animals had encountered during their evolutionary history. A predator armed with stone-tipped spears represented a new challenge entirely. Archaeological discoveries provide direct evidence that hunting occurred. At sites such as Naco, Laner, and Murray Springs in Arizona, Clovis projectile points have been found in clear association with mammoth remains. These discoveries demonstrate that people hunted mammoths and processed their carcasses. Debate continues over how frequently such events occurred. Yet the reality of human predation itself is not in doubt. Supporters of the overkill hypothesis often point beyond North America. Similar patterns appear elsewhere in the world. In Australia, many large animals disappeared after the arrival of humans tens of thousands of years ago. New Zealand lost its giant moa following Polynesian settlement. Madagascar saw the disappearance of giant lemurs and elephant birds after human colonization. Across islands and continents, the arrival of people frequently coincides with losses among the largest members of local ecosystems. Martin described this process using the term blitzkrieg, envisioning a wave of hunting pressure moving across landscapes occupied by animals that lacked an inherited understanding of human danger. To many researchers, the timing remains deeply persuasive. The coincidence between human expansion and megafaunal decline appears difficult to dismiss. Critics, however, point to another side of the equation. Human populations were sparse, settlements scattered, and travel across immense distances was challenging. Some researchers argue that the mathematical models depend upon levels of hunting efficiency that may have been difficult to maintain consistently across an entire continent. The evidence demonstrates that humans hunted these animals. Determining whether hunting alone explains their disappearance remains one of the most enduring debates in paleontology. Sometimes the most important change in an ecosystem begins far from the animals living within it. A shift in ocean currents, a pulse of fresh water, a rearrangement of temperature and rainfall. These forces can travel across continents before their consequences appear in forests, grasslands, and river valleys. Near the end of the Pleistocene, North America entered one of the most abrupt climatic episodes known from the geological record, an event now called the Younger Dryas. Named after Dryas octopetala, a flower adapted to cold conditions whose pollen appears prominently in sediments from this interval, the Younger Dryas began approximately 12,900 years ago. The warming climate that had followed the last glacial maximum faltered. In many regions, temperatures dropped with startling speed. Some parts of North America experienced declines of as much as 10 to 15 degrees Celsius or 50 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Evidence preserved in sediment layers and ice cores suggests that portions of this transition may have unfolded within decades, perhaps even within the span of a single human lifetime. The leading explanation centers on the circulation of the Atlantic Ocean. Vast quantities of glacial meltwater entered northern seas, diluting surface waters and disrupting the thermohaline circulation that transports heat toward higher latitudes. With that system weakened, temperatures across much of the northern hemisphere fell sharply. Climatic zones shifted, rainfall patterns changed. Seasons that had supported particular plant communities became less predictable. Vegetation responded first. Grasslands contracted in some regions, while forests advanced in others. Wetlands expanded in certain landscapes and disappeared from others. Habitats that had once formed broad connected networks became fragmented into smaller patches. Large herbivores depended upon those plant communities for food, migration routes, and seasonal stability. When the distribution of vegetation changed rapidly, the consequences echoed through every level of the ecosystem. For many years, some researchers argued that climate alone explained the extinction of the megafauna. The speed and magnitude of the Younger Dryas appeared sufficient to push vulnerable populations beyond their limits. Large mammals reproduce gradually, require extensive habitat, and often depend upon stable food supplies. A disruption occurring faster than adaptation could proceed would have imposed severe pressure on species already operating near ecological thresholds. Recent discoveries, however, have complicated that picture. Ancient deoxyribonucleic acid recovered from mammoths, mastodons, horses, and other animals has allowed scientists to reconstruct population histories stretching back thousands of years. These studies reveal declines that began before the Younger Dryas reached its full intensity. In several species, numbers were already shrinking before the cold reversal and before human populations became widespread across much of the continent. A different interpretation has therefore emerged. Climate stress reduced population resilience, habitat shifts fragmented herds, and narrowed ecological options. Human hunting entered this landscape at the same time. Even limited harvesting can affect animals with slow reproductive rates when their numbers are already declining. Each pressure amplified the effects of the other. Neither force operated in isolation. This combined explanation has gradually become the prevailing view among many researchers. Climate altered the stage. Human beings introduced a new source of mortality. Together, they created conditions from which numerous species could not recover. The extinction was not driven by a single cause moving through an otherwise stable world. It unfolded through interacting forces, each strengthening the impact of the other as the Pleistocene approached its end. A falling tree does not transform a forest in a single moment. The opening it creates spreads outward through roots, light, soil, water, insects, and seeds. The extinction that reshaped North America followed a similar pattern. It unfolded across centuries, advancing unevenly through different regions, touching one species and then another, each disappearance altering the conditions that had once supported the rest. The first losses carried consequences far beyond the animals themselves. Columbian mammoths and American mastodons occupied roles that extended into nearly every corner of the landscape. Their movements disturbed soil, redistributed nutrients, opened pathways through vegetation, and maintained habitats that countless other organisms relied upon. As their populations diminished, the physical character of many environments began to shift. Grasslands that had long remained open experienced increasing encroachment from shrubs and trees. Forest boundaries changed shape. Productive transition zones between habitats became less extensive and less connected. Those changes reached species that never encountered a hunter's spear. Plant communities responded to altered grazing and browsing pressure. Water sources that had once been maintained through repeated disturbance changed in character. Migration routes that had existed for generations became less reliable. Ecological relationships formed over thousands of years entered a period of instability. Predators faced particularly difficult circumstances. Smilodon fatalis, the American lion, and the short-faced bear occupied positions near the top of the food web. Their bodies reflected long evolutionary histories tied to large prey. A predator weighing hundreds of kilograms cannot easily reorganize its existence around smaller animals. Reproduction is gradual, territory requirements are extensive, and energy demands remain high. As populations of mammoths, horses, camels, mastodons, and other large herbivores contracted, the foundation supporting those carnivores weakened as well. Evidence preserved at La Brea records portions of this transformation. Fossil assemblages dating between roughly 12,000 and 10,000 years ago reveal declining diversity among large mammals. The sequence resembles a thread being pulled from a woven fabric. Individual species disappear, then additional absences follow. The pattern emerges gradually, though its cumulative effect becomes unmistakable. Some populations endured longer than others. Isolated valleys, favorable climates, and regions with lower human presence sometimes functioned as refuges. Within these pockets, species persisted after disappearing elsewhere. Survival in isolation, however, carried its own challenges. Small populations become vulnerable to chance events, genetic bottlenecks, and demographic instability. A harsh season, a disease outbreak, or the loss of breeding individuals can exert outsized influence when numbers are already low. The process also unfolded through social structures. Herd animals depend upon group knowledge, migration traditions, and sufficient population density to maintain successful reproduction. Pack hunters rely on cooperation. Once numbers fall beneath critical thresholds, recovery becomes increasingly difficult, even if external pressures lessen. Ecologists sometimes describe this phenomenon as an extinction vortex, a condition in which decline itself becomes a driver of further decline. Viewed through the lens of deep time, the extinction appears less like a single catastrophe and more like an unraveling. What remains in the asphalt deposits of Los Angeles captures part of that story, a community recorded during its final centuries, preserving traces of relationships that had endured across hundreds of thousands of years before gradually giving way to a different North America. High above cliffs, shaped by wind and salt, a bird still traces roots that were established in a different age. The California condor remains among the largest flying creatures in North America, a survivor whose daily movements contain echoes of ecological relationships far older than any human record. Its presence appears familiar enough at first glance, yet nearly every aspect of its biology points toward a continent that no longer exists. Today, the California condor survives through one of the most intensive conservation efforts ever attempted. Habitat loss, poisoning from lead fragments left in carcasses, and decades of population decline reduced the species to only 27 living individuals by 1987. Every condor alive now descends from that tiny remnant population through captive breeding and reintroduction programs. Without direct intervention, the species would likely have vanished entirely from the wild. Genetic research, however, revealed that this was not the first time the condor approached the edge of extinction. Hidden within its genome lies evidence of a much older demographic collapse. Patterns of genetic diversity indicate a severe population bottleneck dating to roughly 10,000 years ago. Such signatures emerge when a species experiences a dramatic reduction in numbers, leaving only a fraction of its genetic variation to pass into future generations. The timing aligns closely with the disappearance of North America's megafauna. For millions of years, the condor occupied a scavenger's role within ecosystems crowded with enormous herbivores. Colombian mammoths, American mastodons, giant ground sloths, horses, camels, and other large mammals generated a steady supply of carcasses across broad landscapes. A single dead mammoth represented an immense concentration of food, capable of supporting numerous scavengers over extended periods. In such a world, searching for carrion rewarded endurance and distance. The condor's anatomy reflects that reality. With a wingspan reaching approximately 9.5 feet, it possesses the largest wingspan of any living North American bird. Those wings are designed for efficient soaring, allowing the bird to travel great distances while expending relatively little energy. Thermal currents carry it across mountains, valleys, coastlines, and open terrain. This is not the body plan of a species adapted to scattered, unpredictable food sources. It is the body plan of an animal shaped by abundance on a grand scale. As the megafaunal collapse progressed, The condor's ecological foundation weakened. Large carcasses became less frequent. Herds that had once moved across entire regions disappeared. Food resources fragmented. The bird endured where many others did not, yet survival came at a cost, visible thousands of years later in its genetic record. Its population contracted sharply, leaving a biological scar that scientists can still detect. Fossil evidence suggests that condors once ranged across nearly the entire continent. Remains have been discovered from the Pacific coast to the Atlantic margin, extending from present day British Columbia to areas near Florida. The modern distribution is only a small fragment of that former range. Conservation programs have expanded the species beyond a few coastal strongholds, though its continued existence remains closely tied to human stewardship. Seen through this longer perspective, the California condor becomes more than a rare bird. It is a living witness to an ecological transformation that reshaped an entire continent. Its genome preserves the memory of vanished giants, carrying forward a record of absence written not in stone or asphalt, but in inherited strands of life itself. An island can become a time capsule when water rises faster than animals can leave. At the close of the Pleistocene, shorelines shifted across the northern world as glaciers retreated and oceans expanded. Among the lands transformed by those changes was Wrangel Island, a remote stretch of Arctic terrain north of Siberia. As sea levels climbed, a population of mammoths became separated from the mainland, carrying with them a fragment of a fading age. Across continental North America and Eurasia, mammoth populations were disappearing. Climate patterns had changed, habitats were reorganizing, and human communities had spread into regions once occupied only by wildlife. Yet on Wrangel Island, isolation created a different outcome. The sea formed a barrier that limited contact with people and buffered the population from many of the pressures affecting their mainland relatives. While mammoths vanished elsewhere, these island survivors continued their lives for thousands of additional years. The duration of that survival remains one of the most striking facts in paleontology. The last Wrangel mammoths lived until approximately 1,650 years before the Common Era. By then, human civilizations had already constructed monuments, developed complex governments, and established long traditions of agriculture. Communities flourished around the Mediterranean. Kingdoms rose and fell. Through all of that time, mammoths still walked across an Arctic island. Life on Wrangel was different from life on the mainland. Resources were limited, and natural selection responded accordingly. Over many generations, the mammoths became smaller. This process, known as island dwarfism, appears repeatedly throughout evolutionary history whenever large animals become confined to restricted environments. The Wrangel mammoths eventually stood roughly 6 feet at the shoulder, far smaller than their Ice Age ancestors and closer in size to a large horse than to the towering giants that once crossed northern grasslands. Their reduced stature helped them survive within the ecological limits of the island, though another consequence of isolation emerged more gradually. A population cut off from outside gene flow contains only the genetic diversity carried by its remaining members. As generations pass, harmful mutations can become more common, especially when population size remains low. Ancient deoxyribonucleic acid recovered from Wrangel mammoths provides a rare opportunity to observe that process directly. Researchers examining those preserved genomes discovered evidence of inbreeding, reduced diversity, and genetic changes affecting multiple biological systems. A study published in 2017 identified mutations associated with development, neurological function, and insulin signaling. In a large population, many such mutations would likely have been removed through natural selection. Within a small and isolated population, however, chance can overpower that filtering process, allowing potentially harmful changes to persist and accumulate. Wrangell was not the only refuge. Another dwarf mammoth population survived on St. Paul Island in the Bering Sea until approximately 5,600 years ago. These island holdouts demonstrate that extinction unfolded unevenly across geography. Even after mammoths disappeared from continental ecosystems, scattered remnants endured wherever circumstances briefly favored persistence. Eventually, those refuges vanished as well. Human arrival coincided with the final chapters of both island populations, extending a pattern already visible throughout much of the world. Yet the greatest legacy of the Wrangell mammoths may be neither their bones nor their remarkable survival. Preserved within their cells was a genetic record detailed enough for future generations to read, offering an intimate glimpse into the final pages of a lineage that once shaped entire continents. A strand of genetic material, smaller than a grain of dust and broken into countless fragments, can carry a story across tens of thousands of years. For most of the history of paleontology, bones could reveal shape, size, injury, and age. Their chemistry offered clues about diet and habitat. Yet the deeper instructions that once guided the growth of muscle, hair, blood, and bone remained inaccessible. That changed during the 1980s, when researchers first succeeded in extracting genetic material from a Pleistocene specimen, opening a new path into vanished worlds. The development of ancient deoxyribonucleic acid research transformed the field. Frozen ground proved especially valuable. In parts of Siberia and Alaska, permafrost preserved animal remains with extraordinary fidelity. Tissues that would normally decay within years remained protected for millennia. Modern sequencing technology can recover and reconstruct portions of these genomes, allowing scientists to compare extinct animals with living relatives at a level of detail that fossils alone could never provide. Woolly mammoths have become one of the most intensively studied examples. Ancient deoxyribonucleic acid has revealed that mammoths were not a single uniform population spread across the northern world. At least two major genetic lineages followed distinct population histories and migration routes. These lineages met, separated, expanded, and contracted across changing landscapes, leaving traces that remain visible within their genomes long after their bodies disappeared. The same molecular evidence has illuminated traits that leave no direct mark on bone. Researchers identified genetic variants associated with coat coloration, demonstrating that mammoths existed in lighter and darker forms. Fossils rarely preserve enough information to reveal such details. Genetic evidence also uncovered modifications to hemoglobin, the protein responsible for transporting oxygen through the bloodstream. Specific changes allowed oxygen to be released more effectively in extreme cold, supporting survival in environments that challenged even the hardiest large mammals. Additional studies identified mutations affecting hair growth and insulation. At the molecular level, these differences distinguish mammoths from their closest living relatives, the Asian elephants. Such discoveries reveal evolution operating through individual genes, linking visible adaptations to the biological mechanisms that produce them. Ancient deoxyribonucleic acid has also overturned assumptions about predators. A landmark study published in 2021 examined the genetic history of dire wolves. Their appearance had long suggested a close relationship with gray wolves. Genetic evidence told a different story. Dire wolves represented a deeply separate lineage that diverged approximately 5.7 million years ago. Despite sharing territory with gray wolves for immense spans of time, researchers found no evidence of hybridization. An entire evolutionary history had been hidden behind superficial resemblance. Beyond anatomy and relationships, population genetics provides something equally valuable: a timeline. By tracking changes in genetic diversity through time, scientists can identify bottlenecks, migrations, and demographic declines. Across multiple species, one pattern appears repeatedly. Population sizes were shrinking before the period of greatest human expansion, indicating that ecological pressures were already acting on these animals before the final stages of their disappearance. Even when deoxyribonucleic acid fails to survive, researchers now extract ancient proteins from highly degraded specimens. This field, known as proteomics, extends molecular investigation further into the past, expanding the range of species that can be studied. As these techniques continue to improve, extinct animals are becoming more than fossils. Their biology can be examined with a precision that would have seemed impossible only a few decades ago, bringing the distant past into focus through information preserved within the molecules themselves. Across laboratories, computer servers, and frozen tissue collections, a peculiar form of paleontology has emerged. Instead of searching for what remains buried in the ground, researchers are examining whether fragments of the past can be assembled into something living. The question is no longer limited to how mammoths lived or why they disappeared. It now extends to whether aspects of their biology can be recreated within the modern world. One of the most visible efforts is being led by Colossal Biosciences, a company founded in 2021 and based in Dallas. The organization has raised more than $225 million dollars with the stated goal of producing a cold adapted elephant that functionally resembles the woolly mammoth. Their approach relies on gene editing technology, using mammoth genetic information recovered from ancient specimens and introducing selected traits into cells from the Asian elephant. The choice of species is rooted in evolutionary history. Asian elephants are the closest living relatives of mammoths, sharing approximately 99.6% of their genetic material. That remaining fraction contains many of the adaptations that separated an Ice Age grazer from an elephant adapted to warmer environments. Researchers have already identified genes associated with cold tolerance, including those involved in hair growth, subcutaneous fat storage, temperature sensing, and modified hemoglobin capable of releasing oxygen efficiently in frigid conditions. The scientific justification extends beyond curiosity. Large herbivores alter landscapes through movement, feeding behavior, and physical disturbance of the ground. Some researchers propose that herds of mammoth-like animals could help maintain colder permafrost conditions across portions of the Arctic. By trampling snow, they would compress the insulating layer that accumulates during winter. Denser snow allows deeper penetration of cold air into the soil, potentially slowing seasonal thaw. This matters because thawing permafrost contains immense stores of carbon and methane accumulated over thousands of years. A related experiment has been unfolding in northeastern Siberia. Ecologist Sergei Zimov established Pleistocene Park as a large-scale rewilding project designed to test how grazing animals influence Arctic ecosystems. Bison, horses, musk oxen, and other herbivores have been introduced to portions of the landscape. Measurements from some experimental areas show differences in soil temperature compared with locations lacking large animal activity. The results remain under study, yet they provide evidence that animal behavior can influence ground conditions in measurable ways. Alongside the enthusiasm, substantial objections remain. Asian elephants are themselves endangered, creating concern that resources devoted to de-extinction could be diverted from protecting living species. Ethical questions surround the possibility of using elephant surrogates during development. Ecological uncertainties also persist. Even if a mammoth like animal were successfully produced, suitable habitat exists only in limited regions, and no modern environment perfectly matches the world in which mammoths evolved. Another complication involves identity. The resulting animal would not be a true woolly mammoth in the strict biological sense. It would be a hybrid organism carrying selected mammoth traits within an elephant framework. Such distinctions matter scientifically, even if the outward appearance evokes the Ice Age. These debates reach beyond genetics and conservation. They touch on responsibility, memory, and the changing relationship between humanity and extinction. For centuries, disappearance seemed permanent. Today, technology has introduced a possibility that earlier generations could scarcely imagine, transforming extinct animals from subjects of study into potential participants in discussions about the future of life on Earth. A thorn, a fruit, a seed, a beetle. At first glance, they appear ordinary, parts of a living landscape carrying on as they always have. Yet, scattered across North America are biological features that seem strangely out of proportion to the world around them. They persist because evolution works through inheritance, not memory. When a selective pressure disappears, the structures shaped by that pressure do not vanish overnight. They remain, sometimes for thousands of years, lingering like signatures left on a document whose authors are long gone. Biologists call these features evolutionary anachronisms. They are traits that evolved in response to ecological relationships that no longer exist. The landscape still carries them, because 10,000 years is a brief moment on an evolutionary timescale. The continent may have changed, but many organisms continue living with adaptations designed for a different cast of characters. The avocado offers one of the clearest examples. Its fruit contains a large seed protected within soft flesh. For a modern animal, the pit is awkwardly oversized. Few creatures can swallow the fruit whole and transport the seed over meaningful distances. During the Pleistocene, that obstacle may not have existed. Giant ground sloths and gomphothers possessed the size required to consume such fruits and deposit the seeds elsewhere through digestion. When those animals disappeared, the avocado lost much of its natural dispersal network. Its continued existence owes much to human cultivation, which replaced an ecological partnership that had vanished. Trees carry similar traces. The honey locust produces formidable thorns that project directly from its trunk and branches. Some exceed 8 inches in length and appear excessive when compared with the feeding behavior of living deer or other modern browsers. Their scale makes more sense when viewed alongside mammoths and mastodons, animals capable of stripping bark, snapping branches, and exerting immense force on woody vegetation. The tree still bears defensive structures, shaped by adversaries that no longer walk through its habitat. Another example grows across portions of the central United States. The Osage orange produces large green fruits with a texture resembling a woven sphere. They fall heavily to the ground and often remain where they land. Few living animals consume them effectively, and fewer still transport their seeds. Their design suggests an ecological partnership interrupted long ago. The fruit remains, while the consumers it evolved alongside are absent. Even insects, preserve evidence of the transition. Several dung beetle species depended on the waste produced by large herbivores. Sediment records indicate declines in some beetle populations following the disappearance of megafauna. Their fortunes were tied to animals whose influence extended through entire food webs, reaching creatures far smaller than themselves. The consequences may have extended into bird communities as well. Some researchers have proposed that the passenger pigeon, once numbering in the billions, expanded into ecological opportunities created after the megafaunal collapse. Forests adjusting to new conditions may have offered resources unavailable before. Although the passenger pigeon later vanished through human exploitation, its rise may have been linked to changes set in motion thousands of years earlier. These patterns are more than curiosities. They are living evidence embedded in trunks, fruits, insects, and ecosystems. The continent still carries biological memories of mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, and other vanished animals. Their bodies disappeared, yet many of the relationships they shaped remain visible, written into species that continue to inhabit a world transformed by their absence. Before fossil museums, excavation crews, and genetic laboratories, stories carried knowledge across generations. Spoken aloud beside campfires, along river corridors, across hunting grounds, and through seasonal gatherings, they served as archives, maintained not by paper or stone, but by memory. For much of modern scientific history, such traditions were treated as symbolic narratives detached from measurable events. Research from recent decades has encouraged a more careful view, revealing that oral traditions can preserve information across spans of time far greater than many scholars once believed possible. The concept is often called deep oral history. It describes the transmission of information about real places, environmental changes, and historical events through hundreds of generations. Evidence from Australia provides some of the strongest support. Multiple Aboriginal traditions contain descriptions of coastlines, islands, and geological features that correspond to landscapes altered by rising sea levels thousands of years ago. Other accounts preserve memories associated with volcanic activity. Geological and archaeological evidence has independently confirmed many of these changes, demonstrating that oral traditions can retain accurate information over astonishing stretches of time. This possibility reshapes how certain North American traditions are viewed. Across the continent, indigenous communities encountered fossil bones exposed by rivers, erosion, and weathering. Massive skeletons emerged from hillsides and stream banks long before paleontology existed as a scientific discipline. These discoveries were incorporated into existing knowledge systems, becoming part of stories that connected landscape, ancestry, animals, and history. Among the Lakota, large fossil remains were associated with beings known as Ungtehi, powerful creatures linked to water and the land itself. Nez Perce traditions include references to giant bison unlike those familiar today. Several Plains nations preserve accounts of enormous animals pursued by ancestors in a world that differed from the modern one. These narratives do not function as scientific descriptions in the modern sense, yet they demonstrate sustained engagement with evidence preserved in the ground and remembered through culture. Far to the north, traditions of the Dene people describe a powerful animal called Tseskie, a creature no longer present in the living world. Some researchers have noted similarities between elements of these accounts and characteristics associated with woolly mammoths, whose remains occur across parts of the Canadian subarctic. Direct equivalence remains difficult to establish, yet the comparison illustrates how oral traditions and paleontological discoveries occasionally converge in intriguing ways. The relationship extends beyond interpretation In documented cases, indigenous knowledge has guided researchers toward locations containing significant fossil material. Generations of observation, accumulated through travel, hunting, and familiarity with local terrain, preserved information that later proved scientifically valuable. Such collaborations reveal that oral tradition and scientific investigation need not occupy separate worlds. Each offers a different method of preserving and interpreting evidence. Viewed together, these traditions suggest that the disappearance of North American megafauna was more than an ecological transformation. Human communities were present during portions of that transition. They witnessed landscapes changing, animals vanishing, and environments reorganizing. Their descendants carried stories forward through time, adapting them to new circumstances while preserving fragments of older realities. Science recovered mammoths, dire wolves, giant bison, and other lost creatures from sediment, asphalt, and frozen ground. Oral traditions preserved memory through another medium entirely. Across hundreds of generations, knowledge remained woven into narratives, place names, and cultural teachings, creating a second record of a world that once existed and was never completely forgotten. Imagine an ecosystem as a conversation conducted across thousands of species and millions of years. Every participant influences the others, altering movement, reproduction, survival, and opportunity. When a species disappears, the loss extends far beyond a missing animal. Entire networks of interaction vanish with it, leaving gaps that no surviving organism can fully occupy. The disappearance of the short-faced bear, Smilodon, the American lion, and the dire wolf removed more than impressive predators. Each occupied a distinct ecological role refined through long evolutionary histories. Their presence shaped where herbivores fed, when they moved, and how large their populations could become. Across landscapes, occupied by powerful hunters, prey species distributed themselves cautiously, avoiding certain corridors, lingering in others, and continually responding to risk. Through countless daily decisions, vegetation patterns, nutrient distribution, and habitat structure were influenced by animals that never touched a plant. Modern ecology provides repeated examples of what occurs when apex predators vanish. Herbivore populations often expand into areas previously used less frequently. Browsing pressure intensifies. Young trees fail to mature in some locations. Plant communities shift composition. Streambanks lose stabilizing vegetation. Sediment enters waterways. Water quality changes. These patterns have been documented repeatedly across multiple ecosystems, demonstrating how influence can travel through food webs in unexpected directions. Among the largest architects of the vanished world stood the Columbian mammoth. Its significance extended beyond its immense size. Herds moved across enormous distances, consuming vegetation, breaking branches, trampling saplings, and redistributing nutrients through dung and carcasses. Open grasslands persisted partly because such animals continually interrupted the expansion of woody plants. Their movements created habitat conditions upon which hundreds of other species depended. Once mammoths disappeared, those ecological forces weakened. Forests advanced into areas formerly maintained as open terrain. Habitat mosaics shifted. Species adapted to broad grasslands encountered landscapes organized according to different rules. The transformation unfolded over generations, yet its consequences extended across entire regions. The modern continent inherited the result. Another loss is harder to measure because it exists in possibility rather than observation. Every extinct species represented a unique experiment conducted by evolution. Millions of years produced distinctive anatomies, behaviors, physiologies, and ecological strategies. Extinction closes those pathways permanently. The animal itself disappears, and so do all future descendants it might have produced. Adaptations that never had the chance to emerge vanish alongside those already realized. The collapse of megafaunal populations also altered the chemistry of the land. Herds of mammoths, horses, ground sloths, and other large herbivores processed enormous quantities of plant material. Their dung redistributed nutrients across broad areas, linking distant portions of ecosystems through movement and digestion. Soil profiles responded to that continual circulation. When those herds disappeared, nutrient pathways changed as well. Geological and ecological evidence indicates that some of those changes remain detectable long after the animals themselves vanished. Modern grasslands remain productive and biologically rich, yet comparisons with reconstructions of late Pleistocene ecosystems suggest they operate under different conditions than those maintained by megafaunal abundance. The Great Plains still support remarkable life, though they belong to a transformed system, one shaped by absences as much as by presence. What was lost cannot be measured by counting extinct species alone. It includes relationships, processes, possibilities, and ecological influences accumulated across immense spans of time. The living continent still carries their imprint, even where the animals themselves have long since disappeared. Stand on a North American grassland today, and nothing immediately announces what is missing. Herds still move across open country. Predators still hunt. Rivers continue their winding courses through valleys and plains. The landscape appears complete. Yet beneath that appearance rests a deeper story, one recognized by the paleoecologist Paul Martin after decades spent studying the vanished giants. He described the continent as a land of ghosts, a place where ecological roles once occupied by dozens of large animals remain only partially filled. The disappearance of more than 35 species of megafauna left vacancies that no surviving organism fully inherited. Mammoths shaped vegetation through feeding and movement. Giant ground sloths altered plant communities in ways no living browser can replicate. Predators such as the American lion influenced prey behavior across immense territories. Their extinction removed biological forces that had been woven into ecosystems for hundreds of thousands of years. This recognition gave rise to an unusual scientific conversation. Rather than focusing only on preserving what remains, some researchers began asking whether ecosystems could regain functions that disappeared with the megafauna. From that question emerged the field of rewilding science, an effort aimed at restoring ecological processes through the return of large animals or their functional equivalents. The objective is not to recreate the late Pleistocene in exact detail. Time has moved forward, climates have shifted, and species have changed. The goal is to recover missing ecological work. In 2005, conservation biologist Joshua Donlin and his colleagues proposed one of the most ambitious versions of this idea. Writing in the journal Nature, they suggested introducing selected African and Asian megafauna into portions of North America. African elephants were proposed as ecological stand-ins for mammoths. African lions and cheetahs were discussed as possible replacements for extinct predators. Other candidates included Bolson tortoises and Przewalski's horses, species with connections to lost North American relatives. The proposal generated immediate debate. Supporters argued that ecosystems continue to bear the consequences of the megafaunal collapse and that restoring large herbivores and predators could revive ecological interactions absent for millennia. Expanded ranges might also benefit endangered species facing increasing pressure elsewhere. Critics pointed toward uncertainty. Animals introduced into environments where they did not evolve could produce consequences difficult to predict. Ecological restoration and ecological disruption can sometimes appear similar until decades of observation reveal the difference. One example often cited in these discussions comes from Yellowstone National Park. When gray wolves were reintroduced in 1995, changes rippled through the ecosystem. Elk altered grazing patterns along waterways. Willows and aspens recovered in some areas. Beaver populations expanded. Habitat conditions shifted for numerous species. Even river channels responded to changing vegetation patterns. The restoration demonstrated how one predator can influence an entire ecological network. Yet, wolves represent only a fraction of what once existed. No living restoration project approaches the scale of the vanished megafaunal world. What remains scientifically uncontroversial is that modern North America does not represent a final, balanced endpoint. The continent continues to operate under conditions shaped by losses that occurred roughly 10,000 years ago. The landscapes celebrated in documentaries and protected through conservation remain valuable beyond measure. They support extraordinary diversity and deserve careful stewardship. At the same time, they are products of absence as well as presence. Across forests, grasslands, deserts, and mountains, traces of a larger ecological architecture still linger, faint impressions of a continent that once carried far more weight than it does today. A footprint pressed into soft ground lasts only a short while. Rain falls, wind shifts, plants grow, and the mark disappears. Yet some footprints continue across thousands of years, not in soil but in consequences. The extinction of North America's megafauna belongs to that category, a chain of effects still unfolding long after the people who began it were gone. The first humans who entered this continent arrived as travelers. They crossed unfamiliar landscapes, carrying knowledge earned elsewhere, adapting to climates, predators, and opportunities as they moved. Their lives demanded attention to immediate needs. Food had to be found, families had to be protected, shelter had to be secured against cold and hunger. Across valleys, grasslands, forests, and river corridors, they encountered animals unlike anything living today, creatures of immense size, moving through ecosystems shaped over millions of years. Nothing suggests these people understood themselves as participants in a planetary transformation. A hunter bringing down a mammoth was solving a problem measured in days or weeks. The meat could sustain a group through difficult seasons. Bones could become tools. Hides could provide protection. Decisions were made within the scale of human experience, while their consequences unfolded on the scale of ecology and evolution. This distinction gives the Pleistocene extinction its unusual character. The disappearance of the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction followed an extraterrestrial impact, a force entirely outside the influence of any living organism. The losses that followed human arrival in North America emerged from ordinary behavior: hunting, movement across landscapes, use of fire, competition for resources, and the cumulative weight of countless individual choices became ecological forces in their own right. The growing support for the synergy hypothesis deepens that realization. Climate instability strained populations already facing environmental change. Human pressure added another burden. Neither force alone may have been sufficient in many regions. Together they altered the balance. The process unfolded without intention, without planning, and without any awareness of its eventual outcome. A continent changed because people were living their lives as successfully as they could. That possibility carries a lesson extending far beyond the late Pleistocene. Human influence rarely arrives wearing the appearance of catastrophe. More often, it emerges through ordinary actions repeated across large populations and long periods of time. Forests are cleared one project at a time. Rivers are altered through many separate decisions. Species decline through pressures that accumulate gradually until a threshold is crossed. Modern estimates suggest extinction rates now exceed long term background levels by roughly 100 to 1,000 times. Habitat fragmentation, hunting, climate disruption, pollution, and biological invasions frequently interact with one another. The pattern resembles the intertwined pressures inferred from the fossil record. Different species, different technologies, different continents, yet familiar mechanisms remain visible beneath the surface. For that reason, the story of the megafauna does not rest entirely in the past. It occupies a space between memory and warning. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, dire wolves, and many others reveal what can happen when intelligence acquires ecological power faster than it acquires ecological understanding. Their absence remains part of the living world, carried forward in landscapes still shaped by decisions made thousands of years ago. A condor circling above a canyon carries more than its own weight. Every sweep of its wings is connected to decades of work by biologists, veterinarians, wildlife managers, volunteers, lawmakers, and communities who refuse to accept that one of North America's oldest surviving birds should disappear. The bird itself does not know this history. It rides the air as its ancestors did. Yet its presence reveals something unusual, a capacity that has emerged within the same species that once transformed entire ecosystems without understanding the consequences. Awareness changes the meaning of action. The people who crossed into North America near the end of the Pleistocene could observe tracks, weather, seasons, migrations, and animal behavior. Their knowledge was deep and practical, shaped by daily survival. What they lacked was the ability to see centuries ahead. They could not measure extinction rates. They could not reconstruct food webs. They could not predict how the removal of a large herbivore might reshape vegetation, soils, waterways, and hundreds of dependent species. Today, that knowledge exists. Fossils, genetics, ecology, archaeology, and climate science have assembled a picture broad enough to reveal connections that remain invisible within a single human lifetime. From that understanding emerged conservation, ecological restoration, rewilding proposals, and even discussions of de-extinction. These efforts differ in method and ambition, yet each begins with the same realization that ecosystems are networks of relationships and that those relationships can be damaged or repaired. The California condor offers one example. By 1987, only 27 individuals remained in the wild. The decision to capture every remaining bird and place them into a captive breeding program generated fierce debate. Failure would have meant total extinction. Success required patience, extending across decades. Through breeding, monitoring, veterinary care, and reintroduction, the population eventually climbed to roughly 500 individuals. The species remains endangered, yet it continues to move through the skies of western North America. Another illustration unfolded in Yellowstone. Following the return of gray wolves during the 1990s, researchers documented changes spreading through multiple layers of the ecosystem. Herbivore behavior shifted. Young trees gained opportunities to grow in places where intense browsing had previously limited them. Beavers expanded into recovering habitat. Streams responded to changes in vegetation. No single observation explained the transformation. The pattern emerged from many linked processes interacting across time. Such recoveries remain incomplete. Modern ecosystems still contain gaps left by vanished megafauna. Large herbivores, apex predators, scavengers, seed dispersers, and ecosystem engineers once participated in networks of greater scale and complexity. Their absence continues to influence landscapes that appear natural to modern eyes. Research increasingly suggests that restoration is possible, at least in part. Species can rebound, habitats can heal, ecological functions can return when conditions allow. None of this guarantees success, and none of it recreates the lost world exactly as it was. Restoration works with the living present, not a perfect reconstruction of the past. What science ultimately asks is less about technology than responsibility. Knowledge expands the horizon of choice. The first people who encountered mammoths inherited consequences they could not foresee. We inherit consequences that have been studied, measured, mapped, and debated. That difference may be one of the most important ecological developments in human history: the emergence of a species capable of understanding its own footprint while it is still being made. A landscape can retain the outline of vanished lives long after the lives themselves have disappeared. Rivers continue along familiar courses. Grasslands rise and fall with the seasons. Forests spread across hillsides. At first glance, the continent appears complete. Yet ecology often preserves traces of what once occupied a place, and North America still carries many of those traces within its living fabric. Across the western plains, pronghorn move through open country, much as their ancestors did thousands of years ago. A grazing animal may lift its head, tense for an instant, and then launch into a sprint of astonishing speed. The burst can carry it across the grassland faster than any living predator on the continent can realistically pursue. Biologists have long recognized this mismatch. The pronghorn's extraordinary performance evolved in a different world, one populated by hunters capable of applying far greater pressure than those that remain today. The behavior persists because evolution preserves history in muscle, bone, instinct, and reflex. Similar traces appear elsewhere. Fruits continue to grow on trees whose original partners vanished millennia ago. Defensive structures remain on plants long after the animals that selected for them disappeared. Scavengers search enormous distances for food sources that once occurred with greater frequency. Ecological relationships may break, weaken, or transform, yet remnants often endure, woven into species that survived the transition. The list of absences is extensive. Mammoths no longer shape vegetation across northern grasslands. Ground sloths no longer browse woodlands. Dire wolves no longer move through predator guilds. The short-faced bear, the American lion, smilodon, the American cheetah, glyptodons, native horses, native camels, and many others occupy only the fossil record. Their disappearance removed far more than individual species. Entire networks of interaction vanished alongside them, altering energy flow, nutrient movement, vegetation structure, migration patterns, and evolutionary pathways. What remains today is therefore neither untouched wilderness nor ecological ruin. It is a living continent shaped by deep history. Every surviving species occupies a landscape influenced by events that unfolded across thousands of years. Forests, grasslands, wetlands, deserts, and mountains continue functioning, adapting, and evolving. At the same time, many still bear the imprint of a transformation that occurred near the close of the Pleistocene. Human beings now encounter that history from a position unavailable to any earlier generation. Fossils, genetics, ecology, archaeology, indigenous knowledge, climate records, and conservation science have converged to reveal a picture of extraordinary detail. The story assembled from those sources is not one of villains and victims. It is a story of consequences, connections, and the immense reach of ecological change. Research stations examine frozen genetic material. Restoration projects test how ecosystems respond when missing functions return. Condors ride thermal currents above California. Large herbivores reshape Arctic soils in experimental reserves. Across many fields, scientists continue exploring how living systems remember the past. The Pleistocene world will never return exactly as it was. Time does not move in that direction, yet memory persists in genes, landscapes, species, and stories. The great animals are gone, but their influence remains written across the continent. The land still carries their shape, and through the work of science, that shape has become visible once more.